like to remind everybody that we are now live on YouTube and we're going to start recording. Take it away, Jody.
Thanks, Dion. It looks like folks are still joining, so I'm going to give it another minute. All right, well, it looks like we have a pretty good turnout, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us, and a lot of you were with us last night, I think almost all of you, so thank you so much for doing this the second night in a row. I'm Jody Kennedy, again, the Public Involvement and Planning Specialist for CPW, and I am going to give a quick overview again of Zoom. There's a few of us who are new, who were not on last night. And then I do want to do introductions, although for those of you who were on last night, we did kind of longer introductions, particularly because we've got new members. Tonight, I really just want folks to introduce themselves, provide your name. But before we go on to introductions, I do just want to sort of quickly let folks know, if you're new to Zoom, and the lower left-hand corner is your mute button. You are automatically muted when you enter the meeting. If you want to speak, you're going to need to unmute and then remute. We ask you to remute so that we don't have too much noise in the background. Moving along the bottom, I want you to pay attention to the participants button. If you click on that, up on the right-hand side, it will show everyone's name. And then at the bottom of that, you will have the option to raise your hand. If you would like to say something out loud, please raise your hand, and then we'll call on you and ask you to speak. It's really helpful for us. Also, moving along the bottom, there's a chat feature if you prefer not to speak out loud, feel free to type into the chat your questions and your comments, and we'll try to get to those as we can. And then there's also a reactions button down there, which gives you the opportunity to do a thumbs up or clap your hands, which can also be useful. So that is your quick Zoom overview. Also, importantly, this meeting is being recorded. So to help us have notes following the meeting. Also, this is being broadcast to YouTube Live. So you all are aware of that as well. Also, quick overview of the agenda. Tonight, I'm going to turn it over to the director to give us a welcome. And then we're going to have a few updates, including one on our state wildlife area license requirements by Brett Ackerman. We're going to hear about habitat stamp projects by JT Ramatsky, and also CPW's engagement and federal and state land use decision making. And then we're going to hear some updates from our regional managers, learn a little bit what's going on around the state. And then again, at the end of the meeting, we'll have time for you all to bring up issues and items that are important to you and that you would like to address with our leadership team this evening. So that is the agenda. And with that, I'll move on to introductions. And what I'm going to do for introductions is I'm just going to go ahead and go around the boxes and call on you as I see you. And then if you could just introduce yourself really quickly and where you're from. So again, I'm Jody Kennedy, work for CPW, and I'm based in Denver. Sarah Studebaker.
Hey everybody, I'm Sarah. I'm based in Lakewood, and I am a Colorado Parks and Wildlife Policy and Planning Associate.
Great. Next, I've got Ron.
I'm Ron Goodrich, Southeast Delegate from Pueblo.
Next, Willie.
Hi, Willie Kolaski here. I'm a state roundtable member from Colorado Springs.
Next, I've got Reed.
Reed DeWald, Assistant Director of Aquatics, Terrestrial and Natural Resources for CPW.
JT.
Hey everybody, JT Ramatsky, Northwest Regional Manager.
Trent.
Trent Peterson. I'm from the Northeast area, Merino, Colorado.
Kim.
Kim Kokesh. I'm a roundtable member, and I'm
Kim, you cut out a little bit. Might have been your internet, but Kim Kokesh for folks who couldn't hear. And you're in Gunnison, is that right?
no Austin.
Austin.
Yes, just east of Delta, a little bit south of Cedar Ridge. So, and I'm on the roundtable, and so thus in the Southwest region.
Great, thanks. Next, I've got Brett.
Thanks, Jody. Brett Ackerman, Southeast Regional Manager.
Next is Dion.
Dion Cole, IT Liaison, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Thank you.
Heather.
Hi there, Heather Dugan, Assistant Director, Field Services for CPW.
Katie Lanter.
Katie Lanter, Policy and Planning Supervisor for CPW out of Denver.
Commissioner Garcia. And you're on mute, Commissioner.
There it is. Sorry. Charlie Garcia, CPW Commissioner, Sportsman Rep.
Thanks. Next is Larry.
Larry McCormick, Southeast Regional Rep for the Roundtable, Colorado Springs.
Glad you could join us, Larry. Next, we've got Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan Britton, Southeast Region as well.
All right, next I've got Aaron Jones.
Thanks, Jody. Aaron Jones, Southwest Region, Antonito, Colorado.
Great. Eric? Is it Myrie?
Sorry, couldn't find the mute. Howdy, everyone. Eric Myrie, based out of Blackhawk, and I am actually a new Roundtable member.
Great. Next is Corey.
Thanks, Jody. Hey, everyone. Corey Chick, Southwest Region Manager.
Chloe.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chloe Lamprey. I'm from Colorado Springs, and I am also a new Roundtable member.
Commissioner Blecka.
Hi, Betsy Blecka, Parks and Wildlife Commissioner out of Ray, Sportspersons rep.
Brandon.
Brandon Segurello. I'm a Roundtable member out of Grand Junction.
Mark Leslie.
Mark Leslie, Northeast Region Manager.
Ryan.
Yeah, we'll try this again. I got cut off a second ago. Ryan Britton on the round table from Southeast area, Haswell.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, I've got a Brian too. Who is on mute. All right, Brian, we'll come back to you. How about Mark Scofield?
Good afternoon again, everybody. Mark Scofield, Southeast Region Rep, coming to you live from the shores of Lake Antero, almost. It's across the street.
I think we got Brian now.
All right, Brian, is it Bratton? Is that your last name? You want to introduce yourself?
You can use *6 if you're having troubles with that, Brian. I see I've got you unmuted here.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Brian Broughton, Southeast Roundtable, Monument, Colorado.
Great, thanks. All right, Jeff Versteeg. Jeff, are you able to introduce yourself? You are muted as well.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm calling in on my phone because I don't have video with my Wi-Fi link right now. So sorry about that. I had triple mute to undo. I'm Jeff Versteeg, Assistant Director for Research Policy and Planning with Parks and Wildlife.
Thanks. Next, I've got Adam. Oberhue, who's also muted. So for those of you who are on the phone, to unmute, you push *6.
Jody, this is Adam. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the phone tip. Adam Oberhoy, new Roundtable member out of Delta, Colorado.
Great, thanks, Adam. Next, I've got Sharon. Sharon, you're also on mute, and if you're on your phone, you want to push *6. There you go.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sharon Dillon, Northeast Region Roundtable.
Great. Next, I've got Doug Vosak.
Doug Vilsack, Assistant Director for Parks, Wildlife, and Lands at DNR.
And then I've got Emily Urbanic. And Emily, you may also need to unmute. There you go. Emily, we can't hear you. So Emily Orbanik lives in Denver. Are you
How about now?
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Jody. Emily Urbanic, based out of Denver, statewide rep, and currently en route to the White River Valley. So thanks, Dion, in advance for coming to retrieve me when I fall off again.
That's great. All right. Other than Director Prenslow, have I missed anyone? Did anyone not introduce themselves? Okay, good news. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Director. Would you like to give us a welcome?
Absolutely. Here and present and accounted for. Maybe some would say clear and present danger. So, Emily, you better not be fishing in my favorite hole across from my house, or I'm going to be upset. So I want to hear a report. Welcome new members. Welcome people that were here last night. Anybody on the call, again, thank you for what you do. Second night of 2. So excited about the agenda. We've got a lot of things to talk about, some updates in the regions. And so we talked about that last night. Can't do this job without our sportsmen and women who are plugged in and pay attention to what's going on and support us and sometimes give us a boot in the butt. And both of those are effective models. So we like less boot and more carrot, but we're okay with that. So let's get started. And again, I'm proud to be the director of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, proud to be here and listen to what's on your hearts and minds. So thanks, and let's have a great night.
Great, thanks, Director. All right, first up on our agenda tonight, we've got Brett Ackerman going to talk to us about the new state wildlife area license requirements.
Thank you, Jody. I appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for allotting me time to chat about this. This is an important issue that, has been swirling around, honestly, for a long time in this state and in more states than ours. This is something that's dealt with on one level or another by most states at some point. Many of you are very schooled in the North American model of wildlife conservation, and part of that is a funding mechanism for wildlife in North America. And the funding mechanism for wildlife is you. In the end, it's licensed purchasers, sporting equipment buyers, and then bits and pieces from other places. And so for years, we've worked on trying to get that message out there through the Wildlife Council, and many of you have participated in helping us do that. And that's an ongoing process, and we need to continue to do that. This particular issue has to do to some degree with that philosophy, because in the course of protecting wildlife, certainly we have, through a variety of processes, acquired a number of land interests. Most often, those are known as state wildlife areas, and they are public land. But of course, they're, the director talked about this a bit yesterday. They're a little bit different public land from what people consider to be public land generally when they talk about public land in Colorado, in that they were generally purchased using hunter and angler dollars and federal matching grants under certain conditions in order to provide wildlife habitat and to provide wildlife-related recreation. And the policy of the commission has for many years been that they can also provide non-wildlife related recreation so long as that recreation doesn't impede their intended purpose, which again is wildlife-related recreation and wildlife habitat. So, for a number of years, we've had an increasing concern with the number of users on these properties. And I've mentioned before that, a lot of these properties are very high quality properties. If you've been to some of them, they're generally beautiful. They generally have good wildlife habitat, and they're generally desirable places to be. And so people want to go there. They've found their way onto free camping websites. And since the proliferation of the internet, a lot more information is available as to where people can go to, hike or paddleboard or do other things that we love in the outdoors and we generally support, but maybe what these properties were not specifically intended for. So while a lot of those uses were occurring in the past and were somewhat incidental, and we've dealt with them on a property by property basis if those uses have gotten out of hand to some degree. We're in a position now where there really is a lot of use of many of these properties, not all of them, but of many of these properties that we believe is impacting their intended use. For example, you may have snowmobile traffic on winter range properties. You may have a higher degree of hiking than we would have anticipated as incidental use on some of these properties that maybe are lambing or calving properties, and a variety of issues that goes on and on. We certainly have an issue with people camping on these properties. And like the director mentioned last night, we've always been proud about that. We've been proud about what hunters and anglers have provided for outdoor conservation and natural resources in Colorado. And we continue to be proud about that. But, you know, we've come to a position where we feel like we need to take a look at, as the director often puts it, unpaid and unfettered use of these properties. Generally, these properties not only were purchased and acquired using hunter and angler dollars and federal grants that are associated with sporting equipment and shooting equipment, but they continue to be maintained with such funds. And so you who purchase licenses do continue to pay to use these properties, while others who might be well-meaning and love the out of doors and want to go there for their beauty and use them might not be able to, you know, might not have a mechanism currently to contribute in the same way that you have historically contributed, those who purchase licenses. So, excuse me, we approached the commission last January and raised this issue. And we put together an internal working group to start talking about some potential alternatives and approaches as to what we needed to do to ensure these properties were being used for their intended use. That resulted in kind of a multi-phased approach. And the first phase of that approach was trying to address the unpaid use of these properties that are being used by people that aren't paying to use them. And so we asked the commission to pass a regulation that required you to have a hunting or fishing license, a valid hunting or fishing license, and active, in order to go on these properties. In that way, you know, anybody that wanted to still could buy a hunting or fishing license to go on the properties, and it doesn't necessarily, in all cases, protect against unfettered use. So I'll get to that in a moment. But it does start to address the issue of unpaid use. One of the reasons that we requested that the commission ask them or require them to buy a hunting or fishing license is because you may require those, you may remember, those of you that have been around for a long time, that we enacted the habitat stamp back in 2005, 2006. And that's been a wildly successful program as far as continuing to conserve habitat in Colorado. And I'm a huge proponent of that. And you'll hear more from Regional Manager Lematsky about that later on. But one of the things that it was intended to do was also to provide this opportunity for other users to buy a habitat stamp. And we made it a requirement to have a habitat stamp to go on a state wildlife area. We were audited shortly after that by the federal government, who provides, again, a lot of excise taxes associated with our budget and associated with taxes from sporting and shooting equipment. And they said, stop it. You can't do that on these properties. It's considered what's called program income. And essentially they said, we're going to dock you the amount on your next grant check that you took in from charging a habitat stamp to these users to go in. It's not what those properties were intended for, and you know, we can't sanction you gaining more money off of that. So they equaled out our bank account there. So we've been talking, you know, since that time, 2007 or so, about how to approach this, and you know, it's difficult. It's been very difficult, and we've worked with the federal government this go around, and our understanding was that you know, a hunting or fishing license really was the only available option, rather than some kind of alternative access permit, since these properties were intended for hunting or fishing. We've since had more conversations with the federal government, and we're narrowing in on some avenues that actually might allow for a different kind of access permit that would allow use from somebody that didn't buy a hunting or fishing license, but also wouldn't count against program income up to a certain amount. So it's important for you to know that at this point we're exploring, we're continuing to explore options associated with that. Excuse me, my phone's ringing there. And so on to the next thing, which is unfettered use. So we continue to work towards helping folks have an opportunity to contribute in a monetary way to those properties. But admittedly, that doesn't create a situation where, that might restrict a lake that's overrun with, say, paddle boarders who, and on a lake that was intended primarily for fishing. And so phase 2, and we've got a group of folks internally working on this right now, is to take a look at our properties for a number of different things. And one of those things is, where are the problem areas? Where are non-wildlife related uses taking place? And what specifically can we work on, be it a statewide regulation or a property specific regulation that then curtails that use and again further ensures that that property is being used for its intended purpose. Together with that, we're certainly taking a look at properties and the state changes over time. So we're taking a look at properties and are they still serving the purpose that they were intended to serve in the first place? And might they work better as a different type of administration on that property? And, maybe they're not functioning as a state wildlife anymore, and we might be able to, a state wildlife area anymore, and we might be able to transition those properties into properties that might function better as state wildlife areas and use those properties for other things. So there's kind of a variety of things out there on the table that we're working through right now. We are going to go to the commission in September. They've asked us for an update. They've asked us to consider pursuing a potential alternative access permit. So we've been diligently doing that. And I don't know if Justin Rutter is on our call with us tonight, our CFO, but he's been working very hard to nail down the financial ins and outs of being able to do that. So that's where we are currently, and that's where we sit. We will go to the commission meeting in September and have an agenda item on this topic and discuss more the use of state wildlife areas. But our intent as an agency is to, regardless of whether we do go down the road of an additional access permit, which it seems possible that we will, our intent is to continue to work to ensure that these properties are functioning as state wildlife areas and that potentially some of them will have incidental non-wildlife related uses, but not non-wildlife related uses that will interfere with the intended purpose of hunting and fishing and wildlife habitat. So in a nutshell, that's where I sit. That's where we sit. We've had many people working on this and will continue to do so. The director teed up this issue last night, and so I'd be remiss if I certainly didn't give him an opportunity to comment on or correct any of the things that I said here tonight before we move back to Jody.
Nothing for me.
Thank you, Director. I appreciate that. And so stay tuned on this issue. We have had some members of this roundtable come to our last commission meeting and comment on this, and I thank them very much for that. That's the intent of this roundtable. The sports people of Colorado do have a voice. And, the thing that I always say about working in wildlife is we do our best to not make it an us versus them. How can we collaborate? How can we work together? How can we gain synergy with everybody that loves the out of doors to continue on and find a way that works for everybody that doesn't compromise the intent of what we're doing and what you've invested in here in Colorado. So we commit to continue to do so, and we continue to have discussions with all parties involved. So with that, Jody, I'm happy to take any questions or clarify any of those points if we have time.
Great, thanks, Brett. So again, for Zoom protocols, if anyone wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand, click on your participants button at the bottom, and that should bring up the white box with the list of participants. And then at the bottom of that, you have an opportunity to kind of raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. I know that for folks on the phone, that is not an option to you. So for folks on the phone, feel free to just hit *6 and chime in if you'd like. I'm not seeing any hand raises or chats. You can use the chat box if anybody wants to type anything. Now we've got a hand raised by Chloe. Go ahead.
Hi, hey, Brett, thanks so much for everything you guys have been doing for the SWAs and STLs. I know I mentioned earlier, I'm very passionate about the fact that people are interfering with sensitive wildlife property that is, especially when it comes to wintering grounds. Just one thing I wanted to mention that I also put in my testimony that I submitted to the commission is that some of the I'm glad to hear that some of the state wildlife areas are going to be reconsidered, just because when you look at the map, you can see that at the end of the day, some people, in order to enjoy the trails and other areas that are immediately outside of their homes, especially in, say, Chaffee County, they those SWAs may not be fulfilling the same purpose they were originally designed for anymore because of the change of those city boundaries and where people are located. So I just wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to also reconsider where maybe requiring those people to have a fishing and hunting license is equitable as it might have used to be.
Thank you, Chloe. I appreciate that. And those are great thoughts. And thank you for sharing them with the commission. I know that we have 2 commissioners on here tonight, and I know that they appreciate hearing from all sides of an issue, and particularly from interested sports people. So thank you.
Great, thanks. I've also seen a hand up by Ryan Britton. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yes, just on the phone here, you can push *9 and it'll let you know that we're wanting to talk from the phones. But you know, I think you know, requiring the hunting or fishing license for the wildlife areas and whatnot is a good thing. It's nice to see some you know, funds coming off of some of them other uses. The one concern I have with that is the people that are not hunters that are now buying hunting or fishing licenses, having more input as to what actually happens with the properties. And I hope, I guess I would hope that it's weighted towards the sportsman still, but if that makes sense, that's all I've got.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And one of the tenets of our discussion and consideration as we've talked about that particular issue is, yeah, there might be a concern that if somebody's paying into something, then they expect increased services, you know, tailored to the purposes that they like to use those properties for. We certainly intend to reiterate that these properties, their initial purpose remains intact, and that this doesn't constitute any kind of an expansion or intended expansion of recreation, but rather, you know, an opportunity to work together and have more broad-based support in supporting wildlife out there. And I intend to fully make the comment that that these funds are not intended to be used in the future for expanding non-intended incidental use opportunities on the properties. So I sure appreciate that input. Thank you.
All right, a few more hands up. How about Ron Goodrich? Ron, you've got your hand up. Did you want to add something to the conversation? You're on mute.
Yes, I want to thank Brett for taking the position too. I live not too far from Pueblo State Wildlife Area, and it has basically gotten overrun by uses and many trails that have taken away some of the grass, caused erosion. So yes, I appreciate this, and if I would be more than happy to speak at a commission meeting if you want me to. That's something, you guys are bringing up a great thing, and I believe in it.
Thank you very much, Ron. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Ron. All right, Willie.
Yeah, I just recently went to the Ron Goodrich School of Public Speaking. So if I say anything politically incorrect, forgive me, please. But Brett, as a person who's worked for the federal government, the Department of Defense, for almost 28 years, when you say you talk to the federal government, who are you talking to? Is it the Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior, some other organization? Who do you correspond with? That specifically, why I'm asking is I can't make the mental connection of why a habitat stamp is prohibited. And if we charge the habitat stamp fee, why we get docked federal monies. I just not smart enough to figure that out.
Thanks, Willie. You're not. Yeah, thanks, Willie. You're not the only one. And I would just preface that by saying, you know, I love the Ron Goodrich School of Public Speaking. One of the things I said about Ron is that, you know, sports people can always count on Ron to defend them and to speak his mind. And that's why he sits on this council, and we appreciate him. And Willie too, as you've seen. So thank you, Willie, for the question. Just very briefly, in the end, there's an excise tax on hunting and sporting equipment and shooting equipment associated with the Dingell-Johnson Act and the Pittman-Robertson Act, longstanding acts that then, you know, an excise tax comes off of that nationwide, and that goes to the Fish and Wildlife Service, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service within the Department of the Interior, and they administer grants associated with that. And so they have a formula, and they work with all of the individual states to administer those grants, and they send they divide up that excise tax and send it out to the states, commensurate with a number of factors, including how many people are buying licenses. And then, you know, they administer those grants under specific criteria. And so there are, while they're pretty broad, there's an intent of that money to not be diverted away from hunting and fishing and sporting related use. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but mostly a great thing, and has historically been a wonderful thing for our state, because it ensures that license dollars go to wildlife conservation, hunting and fishing, because it has a diversion clause, and that it ensures that those federal dollars continue to go to that and can't be swept in times of financial crisis, which we're certainly in right now. And so in order to do that, there are a few stipulations associated with those. And they monitor very closely for if you do kind of dance around that realm that moves outside of using those properties or the product of those dollars for their intended purpose. They call that diversion, and they say, no, you can't do that, or you'll, you know, be docked the amount of money that you're gaining for that non-intended use. So that's a very simplistic explanation, because, you know, it is tough to understand, Willie, and there are a lot of ins and outs, and Justin understands it a lot better than I do. But generally, I do believe it's a very good thing that those things are very tied closely to hunting and fishing and conservation uses and monitored closely. It does cause us some problems, and this is one of them.
Well, I understand everything you said. But if we ended up in a position where we could charge a usage fee, $5, $7.50, whatever, if we were authorized to do something like that, I don't see the difference between calling it a habitat stamp or a usage fee or a hunting or fishing license. So that was the basis of my question. Also, when you pick up the phone and you send an email, what department of the federal government are you talking to?
So on this item, it's the Fish and Wildlife Service. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Department of the Interior, and particularly their regional financial folks, is who we've been talking to. And I'll address that disconnect real quick, Willie, because now I understand a little better. But it's not a matter of calling it a habitat stamp or an access permit or anything else. It's between the time of the habitat stamp and now, as we've had more in-depth discussions since then with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And again, it's too technical for me to go into here, but there are different methods by which you can meet requirements with the Fish and Wildlife Service: the additive method, the deductive method, and the cost share method. And we've been exploring ways where up to a certain amount, because these federal grants, we have to cost share. So we give a certain amount for the amount of money that's given to us federally. And so we're looking towards a way where access permit dollars might be able to be counted specifically toward our match to the federal grant. So the disconnect isn't between the habitat stamp or what we're doing now. It's between the potential methods that the Fish and Wildlife Service may allow us to employ now that we don't feel they allowed us to employ in the past.
So Brett and Willie, this is Director Prenzel. Brett's answer is absolutely correct. Thanks, Brett. But I drilled down on this with my U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service partner, and what he told me is about a year to year and a half ago, the Fish and Wildlife Service, even though it was in their regulations, always refused to recognize this substitution because they wanted to put more state and federal dollars on the ground for habitat. that makes sense in one way, but it was in the federal regulations. And so they made a shift about a year and a half ago. We were unaware of it, that you can use funds that are non-hunting and fishing dollars to substitute. And that's why we're getting the green light now to use whatever we want to call it, conservation pass, habitat stamp. It'll free up hunting and fishing dollars to use for their intended purpose, any purpose we want. And we can use, let's call it birders license fees to match the federal aid. We've never been allowed to do that until a letter this last week, and until we pushed that issue with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, even though it was in the regs. Not trying to hang them out in effigy, that's just a fact. They chose not to do that. The reason they changed that, which is probably way too much information for you, Willie, but is that a fair amount of states, not Colorado, because quite frankly, we're the beneficiary of a robust funding system, mostly because of non-resident elk hunters. But be that as it may, a fair amount of states were having trouble matching the federal. There was enough federal aid because of the Obama bump buying guns and ammo that some states couldn't even match the state requirement, which is 25%, to get all the federal aid apportioned to them. And so Fish and Wildlife Service changed this rule to allow additional non-program income to meet that requirement to put more federal aid out on the ground. So anyway, it's a lot of he said, she said to say that we can actually use this to our benefit now. So hope that helps.
I appreciate that, sir. I appreciate you taking time to respond to me.
Thanks, Will. And I would just point out, and I think Director Prenslow intimated this as well, that the Fish and Wildlife Service is a great partner of ours, and they've worked very hard on this issue as well. And I certainly don't mean to disparage them if it did come across that way. They've been accommodating and working hard to help us find a solution here.
Thank you for your response.
All right, we've got a few more hands up. Next is Eric.
I appreciate the overview there, Brett. Just a quick question on the usage of the state wildlife areas. Has there been any official research done or impact studies done on what the most prevalent alternative recreation is on these different state wildlife areas? I'm sure it's a wide gamut of activities, but do we have any actual hard data on how they're being used?
Thanks, Eric. I love it when you speak so I can look at the aspen trees in the background. And no, to my knowledge, and somebody on the call can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as hard data and research and studies, no, but our people are on the properties on a very frequent basis and on the ground on a very frequent basis. And so while I would call it, I wouldn't call it anecdotal, I would call it situational. Our folks are very well aware of what's going on most of these properties. And every single property in the state of Colorado is assigned a wildlife technician. And that wildlife technician acts much like some of you on your properties, acts like a land manager or a ranch manager or a landowner, and farms that property when appropriate, does habitat work on that property, employs our biologists, both terrestrial and aquatic on that property. And so we've got a lot of folks that are engaged in these state wildlife areas. And so I would say that it's field monitoring, rather than anecdotal, but not hard research data.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next hand up is Aaron Jones.
Thanks, Jody. I just have a question, and I'll start off with a little information here. In the words of Dick Ray, one of the former game commissioners for Colorado, he would say that everybody that goes out in the field may not be a hunter, but they're a herder. And so whether they're hunting or fishing on these lands, they're pushing animals around or flushing ducks or whatever it is. Have you seen any decrease in use with the license requirements, and how does the public respond to these license requirements?
Thanks. That's a great statement, Aaron, and some good questions as well. Appreciate that. And, it is pretty early in the game. This went into effect July 1. So it's just over a month in. And as the director helped us understand at the last meeting, our intent here, as with many things, is to educate and help people in a proactive way come along and be compliant. So we're not out there writing tickets to people that are on these properties at this time, but we have posted signs on all the properties. And we find that we generally gain very good compliance with signs that we post on properties. Now, we're not naive enough, as are any of you, neither any of you, to believe that all people see and obey all the signs out there. So we are out there. We have some preliminary reports from the field that show strong compliance with making sure that people have a license to get on the property. Whether that is people are going out and buying a license to get on the property, or whether people are avoiding those properties because they don't have a license, I can't answer that question yet. Earlier in this conversation, also, we talked with the commission about potentially placing a checkbox drop down if somebody wanted to buy a license specifically for this purpose, so that we could track a little bit better who was buying specifically for this purpose. And so I know we're looking at that a little bit. Lauren Truitt could talk about that better than I can. But your concerns are exactly right in that it's a very delicate balance. You know, we have to have interest and participation in these properties. We want people to use them for the purposes for which they were intended, some of which include viewing and enjoying wildlife. But you know, I heard Robert speaking through you that in the end, you know, our actions move animals, and so we walk this delicate balance of where activity on state wildlife areas might be appropriate and at what time it might be appropriate. And I think that feeds a little better, Aaron, into our phase 2 of trying to address a little bit where some of these pointed issues might be occurring out there, and attempting to look at some regulations that'll get more pointedly at those issues.
Yeah, well, thank you. You answered. It's pretty good there. I appreciate that.
All right, we've got one more hand up. I'm going to make this the last question on this topic, just so we can keep moving on our agenda. But next we've got Trent Peterson.
So not so much a question, just as a thought I had. I really enjoyed your explanation of all that. And you use a lot of language like intended use and things like that. And I think to a lot of the average people, they just see public property as public property, you know. And so they're not thinking of it as, you know, this property here is specifically a wildlife management property. And so they don't think about intended use of the wildlife and really intended impacts. So I think when we're seeing, as I believe we're seeing, if I'm right looking through Facebook, just kind of a pushback from some people on this. And I think a lot of that just could be because they feel like this is coming out of left field. And like, why are all of a sudden they taking my free access away to use the public property? And then I think a lot of that can just be a misunderstanding from saying, you know, this is a wildlife-based property. And so some of these other non-intended activities are inhibiting that. And so I just think that it's really important, kind of like I said last night, to really get that information out there and let people know that this is an SWA for wildlife, and just get the information out there a little better. So.
Yeah, thanks, Trent. I love your thinking. You know, you cut right to the point, and you're dead on. And we continue to try to educate people, and we have had these conversations significantly with the groups that continue to oppose, you know, the actions that we've taken. And so we're having ongoing conversations with them. And, you know, I'm meeting with some of them, some of us, not just me, but some of us are meeting with them next Monday. And we'll continue to talk exactly about what you just said, Trent. I think it is very important for people to understand that these properties not only are intended for that use, but were bought by the people that use them. And anybody else that comes on there is essentially walking on somebody else's land. And so while we don't say it that bluntly, you know, because it is public land, we are doing our best to get that message out on an individual and group basis, Trent. And so I appreciate that, counsel, and we'll continue to do so.
Great, thanks, Brett. Well, that was a really good discussion on that topic. Really appreciate everyone for speaking up. If there are any more comments or thoughts, you know, feel free to use the chat feature and type your comments in. We might not address all those during this meeting, but we will capture those in our meeting recording and notes. So with that, I'm going to move on to JT Romatsky, who's going to talk to us about habitat stamp projects.
Thanks, Jody. I appreciate it. That was a good conversation. I figured that might go a little bit long. So it looks to my clock, I've got about 14 seconds for 2 other agenda items. I'll do my best, but I'm not sure I can make that happen. I actually am pretty excited to be able to talk about the first one, which is the Habitat Stamp Committee and the Habitat Stamp Projects, our RFP this year. Tremendously successful, as everybody knows. I'm not going to spend time, as I was going to go back through some of the history, but I do want to start out. Brett stole a little bit of my thunder, but I'm glad he did, talking about the North American model of wildlife management and how blessed we are in the United States and how we manage wildlife in North America. The sports people, sports persons fund everything that we do. And the RFP, the Habitat Stamp money that comes in is probably a story that has been failed to be told adequately. And I probably won't do it justice tonight, but you know, we talked a little bit about it last night, with a significant portion going to the acquisition of Fisher's Peak and so many other properties, conservation easements, access around the state. And it's a tremendous asset that we have. And the Habitat Stamp Committee, which is made up of governor selected and appointed individuals and Senate confirmed folks, also have Brett Ackerman and myself as ex officio members that sit and work with that committee. So I wanted to talk just briefly as a summary about this year. And I think I can speak for the entire committee that this is probably one of the hardest years we've had to try and start to look at how are we going to scale this down. Some of the projects, some of the opportunities that are afforded to our agency through Sportsman's dollars is incredible. So if you don't know, this year we opened up a request for proposal for the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Program with $11 million. The commission sets the funding priorities and some of the funding preferences. I'll let you know what those are really quickly. That, you know, first and foremost, public access for hunting, fishing, and wildlife viewing, big game winter range and migration corridors, protecting habitat for species of concern, riparian areas and wetlands, landscape scale parcels, and parcels that provide connectivity. And then the funding preferences for 2020 are third-party conservation easements, increased public access, greater donated values, conservation easements that support wildlife crossings, and finally working farms and ranches. And so this year, after it was open on April 15th and closed around the middle of May, we got 27 different proposals around the state. Out of the 27, there was a total of $44,289,000 in funding to conserve almost 44,000 acres through conservation easements, an additional 30,000 acres of public access. The list goes on and on. We are really excited about what we're going to be bringing forward this year. I would concur with the last statement on the state wildlife area aspect of this too, is that this is yet another huge opportunity and story for us to tell around the state about the success of sportsmen and women and what we've done to actually ensure the productivity and the viability of wildlife and diversity of wildlife in the state of Colorado. So as we go through this process, it'll move through the commission process here starting in September. I believe it's finalized somewhere around November, and then our real estate section starts to work really hard on these projects to get those acquired over the course of the next year or two. So that's a rough rundown of where we're at right now, given our time constraints. Maybe I'll just, Jody, stop right there and pause. And if people have questions about the Habitat Stamp Program, Colorado Wildlife Habitat Program, our RFP, I'd be happy to talk about it. One note that I might make is that it's interesting for the wildlife side of our agency that we really only have 2 ways to acquire property. One is through this RFP, and the other is to actually run legislation. And so this is our opportunity to increase, whether it be fee title, conservation easements, access, and all those things. And I couldn't be more proud of the work that our staff has done, and obviously the Habitat Stamp Committee too. So Jody, I'll pause there for a minute and let you take it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, JT. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this topic? I don't see any hands raised, JT. I think you're good to move on.
Okay.
Jody, I think Roy's trying to say something. Let me unmute him here.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. He's trying.
We got a thumbs up from Mark Scofield.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There you go, Roy.
All right, thank you very much. How do you raise your hand if you want to? Do you do this, or you just have a little button somewhere on this screen?
So if you click on the participants
Yeah.
bottom of your screen, on the right-hand side, a white box should pop up with all the names listed. At the bottom of that, you should have an option to raise your hand.
Okay, I was waving, but nobody was paying any attention. Okay, here's my question. I know that JT knows about this, I'm thinking, and I've had some experience with this, with the RFP process, with all of that stuff when it comes to the Habitat Stamp program. I've submitted a couple of properties, a couple of projects, and number one problem I had is the CPW does not commit money or even write a letter and say we are committing to this amount of money without going clear to that 2 years down the road thing, or that year and a half or 2 years once the real estate people get the information. The CPW lost out on a beautiful project that I had in line, and we were on the top of the list from the southwest part of the state. And the only reason it didn't go forward is because the CPW would not give us a letter, and so we could take it to the bank and say, hey, we're going to get this refinanced. They had to sell the ranch instead of giving it or putting it into a conservation easement, which we had all set up and ready to go. The thing is, the CPW moves too slowly and does not commit in writing, which the bank would have accepted. That's one question. That's one comment, and you can research that all you want. In 2017, we had a project going forward. Now that's 3 years ago, I know, but this program has been going on for about 15 to 20 years. And every year it gets bigger, and there's about $9 to $12 million bucks available for the RFP every year. 2017, there was a zero commitment. Zero money went out. What happened to that money? That's a question that you probably go, what? Who knows that?
Well, thank you for both the comment and the question. I think the comment is a super complex statement, I think, being made about real estate processes, and I can confer with you that for sure some of these processes take an awful lot of time and are very complex, and so at the same time, I think we're doing the best we can given some of those criticisms and some of the processes. And so first, we have a commission process that takes quite a little bit of time, about to the end of the year. And then as those things move forward, whether there's access or if it's an easement that we're going to hold, we still also have to go back to the state legislature, to the CDC, to get their formal approval as well. And at the same time, we're working with county commissioners and other people. So the level of oversight over your wildlife management agency is incredibly difficult and challenging for us. And it's not lost on me. So thank you for the comment. And I don't think it's lost on our Habitat Stamp Committee either. As far as your question about 2017, At the time, our director and our commission chose to take a break and not fund the RFP that particular year, primarily because of some of the strategies and how we intended to move forward, and starting to reevaluate the actual habitat stamp, what we could use it for, what the purposes were. And also a lot of that was from some of the criticism from some of the legislators at the CDC and other folks. And so that decision was made through the director at the time and our commission. And now we're back up and running. I think we're sitting in a very good spot with habitat stamp dollars, and we're looking forward to continuing to fund this and hopefully increasing it. I think you probably know as well as anybody, we're the only game in town. And so all the land trust agencies and everybody else are well aware of it too, and they're excited about this opportunity.
Hey, JT, Roy, this is Dan. The only thing I'd add to that, thanks JT, is that Roy, good for you. You pay attention. I like that. But that, and it's not all habitat stamp. We use GoCo money too in that RFP, but that habitat stamp dollars, and quite frankly, the GoCo dollars, because by constitution, the 50% of lottery comes to us, 25% parks, 25% wildlife. So in both pots of money though, GoCo's a little different nuance, but it's still coming to us. And it's probably about $6 or $7 million of that 11 that was not spent in 17 is still in our bank account. So it will be redeployed. It's not lost to anybody. We're an enterprise agency, and that money stays in our account. It's not swept.
No, very good. That's what I wanted to hear. And I'm sure most sportsmen would like to hear that also. The one thing that really didn't make me nervous is that somebody did sweep it away to somewhere else. So thank you very much for that. Hopefully, if you can stick with the 11 million, maybe we'll get back to that 9 that we dropped out of, $9 million that are slipped through the crack, but it's still in the bank apparently. So that's good. Thank you very much for both of you.
Bet. Jody, is there anything else? Any other questions, or shall I move on to my last topic?
There are no other hands raised, so I think it'd be great to move on.
Okay, thanks. So this again is another topic that has oftentimes gets overlooked, and I want to talk just briefly about our energy and land use and what we do as an agency, our staff involvement, some of the procedures and processes. It's something that we don't tell that story very well again. But certainly we spend an awful lot of time from our district wildlife managers, our biologists, our area managers, and so on and so forth to make sure that wildlife has a voice when counties, municipalities, our federal government, or anybody else is looking at different innovative uses of our land, whether it's a subdivision or oil and gas or anything else. There's 64 counties in the state of Colorado, 272 active municipalities. There's 28 different open space and trail departments. We have 10 different Bureau of Land Management offices, 11 Forest Service offices, 4 different Army Corps of Engineers that we work with, State Land Board, Department of Transportation, Reclamation. There's also 38 different land trusts in the state. And so our staff spends a significant amount of your money and time to work closely with all of these different entities to make sure that indeed wildlife has a place when we're moving through human use. And so there's an awful lot of things that happen there, and we intend to provide a presentation to our commission here in September, hopefully, to have a conversation about this and to talk about the level of expertise that we actually have, the robustness, the in-depthness that we have when it comes to whether it's NEPA or negotiating opportunities, whether it's open space, migratory corridors, anything else for wildlife. And so we worked really hard doing this. And in fact, it was probably about 2005 or so with the last big oil and gas boom that it was apparent to us as an organization that, we're being so reactive, we're getting run over when it comes to some of, whether it's land use and oil and gas and different things. And at the time, we increased our FTE and got one individual just to be a liaison with the energy industry. And it turned into be an incredible success, and it allowed us to actually build relationships within the industry and other state and federal agencies. And later, at this point in time, we have 7 total full-time positions that are devoted, 4 of those to energy liaison and the other 3 to land use and land use work. And so literally these people, that's all they do. We work an awful lot with DWMs, working with local municipalities if there's going to be a subdivision, all the way up to large scale EISs that may cover an entire region, transmission lines, oil and gas, and everything. And we try and work to a point to where we can begin to be proactive. And I think we've done a really good job of that. Everything about our agency, we get a lot of questions even at our commission and through the public. And our agency has been kind of pushed back and forth to be either the one that's going to stop development or the one that is going to figure out a common way to allow things to happen. And what I'll tell you, hopefully everybody knows this, is that our agency is built on conservation, and conservation is defined as the wise use of our natural resources. We certainly are not a preservation agency, and we believe that humanity has a role on Earth, and our job is to figure out ways that we can ameliorate some of the impacts that humans have to make sure that we have future generations of different species of wildlife. And so that's one point, that when we do this, we provide recommendations. We don't provide guidance or mandates that say you shall not build here or anywhere else. We are a pretty significant land management agency with state wildlife areas and state parks, but certainly counties and Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, and other folks really are the stewards of those properties. And thus we work hard with them to avoid and minimize and ultimately hopefully mitigate a lot of the impacts that happen to wildlife. With respect to oil and gas, I can tell you that literally just in the last about 10 years, we've worked with 19 different oil and gas companies on the Western Slope to create wildlife mitigation plans. And we cover with those plans about 730,000 acres of land. Those agreements also have resulted in about $2.5 million coming directly back to our agency to help doing mitigation work, to help do research, to help do an awful lot of things. We consult on every oil and gas permit that is within either sensitive wildlife habitats or restricted surface habitats in the state since House Bill 1298. And just since 2015, those folks that I mentioned have consulted on 1,087 different permits. We do hundreds of land use letters every single year. And the meetings and everything else that we go to, I think it's a story that somehow I'm hoping we can put together in an efficient way to be able to tell this story. And our sportsmen and women also need to understand the level of work that we're trying to do and how to be proactive versus reactive. Examples of that are trying to develop energy teams or recreation teams of staff to try and coordinate and work with open space groups or trail users to get ahead of some of the threats that we face with, again, the word unfettered use of some of even our federal lands and our state lands. And so tonight, what I wanted to do was essentially just tell you that small story and then allow you guys to ask some questions or if you have questions of other things that we're involved in. But it's a subset of work that I think gets overlooked quite often. And we have some incredible experts and professionals on staff that do an incredible amount of work. So Jody, I'll stop there. Maybe there's some questions. If not, I know we're running a little bit behind, but I will forget Regional Manager Ackerman for that, obviously.
Thanks, JT. There is one hand up. Larry McCormick, go ahead. And Larry, you need to unmute. You got it.
I'm trying to learn how to unmute myself. So my wife wants to mute me more. So we'll see. Hey, JT, thanks for that. Have a question when it comes to the use of federal land, in particular, a couple areas that I'm familiar with that have had a lot of closures talking about dispersed camping, some complete areas chained off, trails, other things. How do they coordinate that? Because it looks to me like in some areas, I have two motives here. One is hunting and the other one is camping. And in a particular area, they have closed literally hundreds of dispersed camping areas because too many people are using it. Now, I've voiced my opinion that I think that it's terrible timing with the COVID crisis and all that sort of thing. But they tell me it was a 2-year plan, and then they told me it was pressure from locals. But whatever the reasons are, how does that get coordinated to the hunting public out here with big game season right around the corner?
Thanks, Larry. That's an outstanding question. So first and foremost, we work very closely with the BLM, Forest Service, National Parks, other folks. One of our primary missions, obviously, is to try and work with them on travel management plans. Also, you know, when you have catastrophic wildfires or other things where they need to close something off, they communicate those needs with us routinely. During the course of some of their NEPA analysis on travel management or other things, they obviously will meet with our staff and talk about either needs for seasonal closures or increased access. Hopefully, we're advocating across the state for increased access for hunters and fishermen, especially during some of those time periods. I think the Forest Service and BLM and others are getting pressed just like us with respect to our wildlife areas, in that they're looking at new ways to try and reduce some of the impacts on public land. And unfortunately, a lot of those things just continue to diminish access for us. And I know that I'll say rest assured, you know, we're definitely are your advocates for trying to maintain access, especially during hunting seasons and other times. There are some conflicts with when, as an example, our staff may recommend seasonal winter closures for some of our big game herds, and at the same time, we're doing a bit of an injustice to some of our houndsmen and other folks that we're also trying to get out there. And so it's a bit of a balancing act, and none of it is perfect, but certainly I think the communication is alive and well with those land management agencies. The communication from that point, maybe this will answer the second part of your question. You know, we've got different things like here in the Northwest region, we put together a big game hunting guide, and every year before the seasons try and update that with any kind of new information about access issues, permit requirements, fire, you know, they may have some fires or other things. We don't always nail that on the head, but we try and work really closely with them, Larry.
Okay, I think I may disagree with their communications right now. I've checked their websites. Some of their closures are actually going on because I've seen them myself, and they're not listed. So certainly will impact hunters. And I can tell you offline after the meeting where some of these areas are, but I appreciate you addressing that very much.
Yeah, and I might just say one other thing really quickly, that, you know, we rely on you folks an awful lot. We rely on the agricultural community, on hunters and fishermen to give us a call and ask us those questions. We may not know about every single thing, but if you bring something to our attention, we're certainly willing to go and ask those hard questions or figure those things out and try and work on it.
Okay, thank you.
This is Doug, just to pipe in here too. I mean, one of the things we've really used during the COVID-19 crisis to try to get real-time information out is the CoTrax app. Kind of the trails app that we have, but we can also use that, you know, for areas, not just trails, if there's closures or campground closures and things like that. So as you see those, I mean, if they aren't listed on CoTrax or you haven't found public information about them, I think there's just kind of an address on that CoTrex, COTREX website, and you can let us know and we can make sure that gets posted too. So,
yeah, will do.
I think, Larry, this is Dan Prenzlow again too, and I think I don't think you were on last night, but I talked a lot about how we have an ethic of manage to yes, no is simple in COVID, and not complex, but doesn't really do very good customer service. And so we've worked hard at that. And Doug, I'm surprised you didn't mention that, but I'll mention it. We did have and still have joint meetings with Forest Service and National Park Service, BLM, on some of those kind of land uses and closures. But that being said, I'll also tell you that we saw more than a couple incidences that I would say, whether it was COVID or anything else, finances, that there were some closures at the federal level that affected us. They closed Mount Evans, et cetera, road, just one of many. So I'm not sure they were always managing under that managed to yes ethic. And they had budgetary issues too. But I think JT hit it on the head. When you hear about one of those, give us a buzz and we'll look into it.
Will do. Thank you.
All right, we've got one more hand up, which is Roy. So Roy, I'm going to let you talk, and then we are going to move on the agenda, see if we can make up a little time. So go ahead, Roy.
Okay, real quick, I would just like to point out that there's a regional advisory committee for Southwest Colorado, and they asked for applications about 2 years ago. That all of those applications are still on Governor Polis's desk. So how about one thing we do is get that moving forward. If somebody is in the State House and happens to walk by and say, hey, what about all those applications for the regional advisory committee for the Forest Service and the BLM? Both have a whole stack of them, and they haven't moved. I got a nice certificate that said I was on the advisory committee for the BLM, but we've never had a meeting in 3 years. So I think the best way to do this, and one of the things that I've learned how to do, is talk to the local office, get on their mailing list, and get on their mailing list for projects. And they have meetings all the time, but they just don't advertise it very much. And we did go through some on the Uncompahgre where they were about to close down, and my estimation was about 22 acres of access roads. And we talked to them and we met with them. The public came to them, and they had 2 meetings then, and actually canceled the project because it really didn't make sense at that time. Because when you start talking about disturbing 22 acres, that's like a whole gravel pit, and they won't even allow that. So anyway, that whole thing, the best thing to do is talk to the local GMUG, every one of the the foresters or the BLM, have people that are interested in getting our opinions, but they don't make a very good attempt to spread the word that they're going to actually have a public meeting. So just get on their mailing list for that. And if somebody, I know you guys all go down there down to the courthouse and down to the Capitol building, and maybe you could find this Polis guy and have him kick those applications going up. I don't know what's happening. So
Is this the just to follow up on that? Is that the Resource Advisory Councils you're talking about?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. There's one for the BLM and one for the GMUG.
Right. I mean, we actually, I have reviewed those myself for the governor and for Director Gibbs, and we have sent our recommendations back and essentially approved what the BLM has sent us on the BLM side. The challenge has been that the feds haven't formed those committees. We actually have 2 years of nominations that we have approved, that the administration has approved here in Colorado, that no action has been taken on at the federal level, and meetings have not been held. So I would redirect your comments probably to the BLM and the federal administration, because we have actually approved those committees.
Hey, they've got an office right down the hall, right down the road from me. I might just go talk to them. Thank you very much. But that doesn't
go knock on their door.
Yeah, that doesn't. Really, to me, it doesn't cut it. Okay, I think that I got a nice certificate and something you hang on the wall from Purdue a while back, but still haven't got a call for a meeting at all. So anyway, thank you very much, and I appreciate your thinking about that.
All right, thanks, Roy, and thanks again for a good conversation, you all. So we're going to move on to regional manager updates, and first up is Corey Chick, and we are a little bit behind on the agenda, so I'm just going to ask our regional managers to try to keep it brief. Go ahead, Corey.
Thanks, Jody. I appreciate it. I did want to welcome all the members, especially the new members, and I will try to be brief because I know Brett will probably need a little bit more time than the rest of us. So I will be brief. Just touching on a few things. One of the nice things that come out of this year's big game season structure is the commission allowing the agency to address either biological or social issues within some of our units on a year-to-year basis. One of those that come out of that, and I'll give it to JT for leading that even prior to this, but in southwest corner of the state, we're having some of the lowest cow-calf ratios in the state. And in 12 GMUs, we limited archery to sex specific, so either bull or cow. And then on top of that, there is a research study that is occurring over there, and this year they were able to trap or catch 57 calves and put collars on those, so we could hopefully get a handle and understand more of what's going on over there in that corner of the state. So more to come on that, but good news that we're able to do that, and that's kicked off. Another one that they're out of the San Luis Valley. We had a citizen petition come up, more related right there in Unit 83, to where we were having some local issues, more human health and safety, and some law enforcement issues. And second and third rifle elk were limited in that part of the valley. I think the next few years will really be telltale on if that takes the effect we were hoping for, and definitely continue to work with those folks in that part and local law enforcement to deal with those issues. Probably more statewide, but it's trickling down in Southwest. Is over the past few years we've expanded mandatory CWD testing in the state. Last year, I know a lot of the pressure, or at least some of the push, was on the Eastern Plains. We've had some that we've done. They're more in that Montrose country. That's now moving more widespread in Southwest. So hopefully we can more understand CWD prevalence within the region. And then just wanted to touch a little bit. Some of the conversation last night really struck me. And we're seeing a lot of folks on the ground, even as far as we are from, the higher population areas. Looking at some of the numbers, we're seeing increase in visitation or usage to the tune of 130% of average, and even more in other parts of the state. But I think what we're seeing a lot, and again, this is statewide, is that so many folks are getting outdoors, which is great, but we're seeing a lot more novices out there as well. And I think this year will definitely, if it's not already broken the record, probably break the record on drownings, which is sad. We've had 3 in the region this year. I can't speak highly enough of staff that has to deal with those or investigate those. Our law enforcement teams that come out and really help us out with those are tremendous. When we were talking about the influx of folks, I can truly speak to that. Here at Navajo, with New Mexico being shut down, we've seen a huge influx that's not only, where we've had high visitation rates, but where our ANS, both decon and check stations are just, they're going all day. They're seeing at least 100% or higher checks, somewhere around 80% or higher decons. Just amazing what staff has been able to pull off this year. And then really the last thing I wanted to talk about is more of, I think Doug touched on it a little bit, and southwest portion of the state, I don't think we've left the drought situation. The majority of the region is under extreme, and if it's not extreme, we're definitely under the severe. Our monsoon season this year lasted about 1 week, which, and I feel for JT right now with the fires he has up there in his country. We couldn't have prayed hard enough at that time for rain with the fires that we had going on, and where we didn't get much, they were definitely timely and helped us out with those fires. So with that, I'll quit, and if there's any questions or there at the end, or however you want to do that, Jody. But again, welcome, especially the new members, Adam Oberhue, Aaron Jones, Kim Kolsch. Look forward to getting to know you better, and definitely working with you here in the future. So thanks, Jody.
Great. Thanks, Corey. Well, I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to keep us moving. Next is Brett Ackerman.
Thanks, Jody. Nothing to add. No, I'm just kidding. We know better than that. These regional managers are a tough crowd, aren't they? I'll tell you what. I will be brief, though. We've, of course, been working on a lot of things in the Southeast region, but I want to talk just a little bit about something that's more statewide. And we've been working on Senate Bill 181, which is Colorado Oil and Gas Commission regulations. And there was a bill passed, Senate Bill 181, that required them to essentially shift their mission to more of a conservation-minded focus. And part of that is associated with wildlife impacts that surround the development of oil and gas in Colorado. And so we've been working as an agency very hard on helping consult with them and helping rewrite the rules around oil and gas exploration for increased protection of wildlife throughout the state. And so this is one of those things that happens behind the scenes that really not a lot of folks see. You folks are clued into these processes more than most. But just wanted to let everybody know that that's something that we have been and continue to participate in. The wildlife-related COGCC hearings will take place later this fall in the October timeframe. Also in the Southeast, we continue to work hard on the opening of Fisher's Peak State Park. A lot of you and other people have asked questions associated with this state park because, as Ron Goodrich has pointed out a number of times, there has been a significant wildlife investment in this property as well, yet the whole property is being called a state park. Just wanted to remind everybody that we are working hard to continue to provide hunting recreation on that property. We're very excited about that opportunity. We'll continue to work on that going forward. I also wanted to mention something that came up at our Southeast Region Caucus, which was the East Slope and Plains Wildlife Prioritization Study, which sounds like a lot of fun, and it's just as fun as it sounds, but it's very useful. As we continue to have a population increase here in Colorado, it's very important that we understand and protect migration corridors. I know you all have talked about that, and the governor has talked about it, and we've talked about it on the federal level and west-wide, that we need to protect migration corridors for big game. Now, that's not news to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We've known that for a long time, and we've done that for a long time. But there is more of a concerted effort now to map and protect big game migration areas and really all wildlife corridors. And so on the west slope, JT and Corey's folks have worked hard to work with CDOT to create a west slope wildlife prioritization study that specifically targeted traffic highway corridors and where they intersected with migration corridors, and came out with a great product that West Slope Wide helped us understand where those pinch points on highways are. So we're working hard with CDOT on this side of the hill to examine a similar study. It's a bit different because on the west slope there's a lot of wildlife and not as much traffic, and on the east slope there's a lot more traffic. And so, you know, we're working on identifying those pinch points here, and that's an exciting study that's again behind the scenes that we're working on. Those are a couple of global things. I did want to mention that during the COVID pandemic, it has been absolutely crazy in the out of doors of Colorado, and you know, pros and cons associated with that. And I'll stick on the pro side. Our visitation in our areas has gone way up, and especially on the park side is very high. In the month of June this year, almost 500,000 people visited Lake Pueblo State Park, which is our most visited state park. And you know, we mentioned earlier that we're an enterprise agency, and obviously many entities in Colorado are suffering at this point, you know, be it private citizens or agencies or businesses. That's not the case as much for us because people have been outside and continue to go outside a lot. But we continue to try to help provide that much needed relief valve for people in the out of doors. The pro side of that is that we recognize that the relevancy of an agency like ours and an entity like yours is higher now than it's been in recent years. And so we need to continue to seize this opportunity to help people be interested in the outdoors, educate them on some of the issues that have come up here tonight, and help them to, again, band together with us and move forward together in conservation. So I'll stop there, Jody, although as my counterparts have pointed out, I could continue on.
Thanks, Brett. We've got one hand up. Mark Scofield, go ahead. Mark, it looks like you're on mute.
I think his internet froze up there.
Brett, my constituents in my Ivy Wild neighborhood in Colorado Springs. Mute.
See, Mark, but we still don't hear you.
We've lost you kind of, Mark.
Yeah, you're muted again. Here, I'll take care of it there. All right. It looks like he dropped off.
The challenges of technology and Zoom meetings. Well, if Mark joins back with us, I'll try to call him again. So I don't see any other hands up. So with that, let's keep moving. So next on the agenda, we've got Mark Leslie. It's going to give an update for Northeast region.
Thanks, Jody. It's great to see everybody on the call, and look forward to working with you all to solve some of our challenges that we've got coming up. Northeast region is a wonderful place, a very interesting place to work. We've got about 4.5 million people that live in the region, and we've got everything from sheep and goats to greater prairie chickens. And so we've got the high alpine, the Front Range area, and Eastern Plains, which I think is really fascinating. Our folks have been really busy. A lot of mention about how busy everybody is, and I think we've seen it up here just as much or more than anybody as well. We had on our Northeast region parks, all 15 parks, we've had about 8.5 million visitors this last year in the Northeast region alone, compared to about 4.5 million visitors at Rocky Mountain National Park. Just kind of puts that in perspective. We're seeing a concomitant use of our state wildlife areas as well. And I've been out on quite a few of them, talked to our state wildlife area technicians and area wildlife managers that manage those properties. And we're seeing a lot of newbies, as was mentioned earlier, getting out and utilizing those properties. I don't need to belabor why we're so concerned about that issue. Obviously, not all of our state wildlife areas are fee title. We lease a lot of them, specifically a lot of the larger reservoirs that we have for state wildlife areas are actually leased. And so it's so important for us to be able to work with our water providers and make sure that we're utilizing those properties for the purposes for which they were intended. I want to talk on that line a little bit about some water projects that we've got going on in the Northeast region. There's a lot of them that our staff are involved in at the regional level, as well as Reed DeWalt staff in the water department and our regional water engineers, our biologists, and area wildlife and district wildlife managers. We've got Northern Integrated Supply Project up here, which is also known as Glade Reservoir, possibility for a reservoir that will exceed Horsetooth Reservoir in size, and obviously will provide some recreation. We're still having discussions with Northern Water, the City of Fort Collins, and Larimer County about who will manage that reservoir for recreation. Right now, I think the greatest likelihood is that Larimer County Open Space will manage that property, but we will manage the fishing recreation on that water. We've got another project up here in the Fort Collins area, the Halligan Seaman. It's an enlargement of Halligan Reservoir that will impact a lot of wildlife habitat. So we're working diligently on that one. Gross Reservoir down in the Boulder area is also one that we've been heavily involved in with Forest Service. And I want to talk a little bit about wildlife conflicts. What we have in the Northeast region, for those of you that haven't heard this spiel from me before, is that we have a lot of wildlife, and we have a lot of people living in conjunction with wildlife and recreating with the wildlife up here. And the interesting thing about some of these urban and suburban areas is that county and city open space departments they have made that a priority to buy up those lands to protect them and preserve the wildlife on them. But the management component of the wildlife on those properties has been missing, in my opinion. And so we've been working for many years with our county and city open space partners to try to encourage them to be bold and allow management on those properties. We use hunting as our main management tool. And so we've had some real successes. Some of you have heard me talk about Rabbit Mountain. It's a Boulder County open space property with an overabundance of elk. And we have successfully had 3 years of elk hunting on Rabbit Mountain open space. And then this year, the Boulder County Commissioners voted to expand that project to a couple more open space properties down in Boulder. So we're very excited about that. We have a renewal of Bodecker Reservoir on the fishing side over here by Loveland. We've got Berthoud Reservoir that's going to be coming online later this fall. We're working with Reed's folks and our Northeast landowners for corners for conservation to allow pheasant hunting and small game access. We have our state land board access process that's run through the Southeast region, but that's increasing a lot of acreage in the Northeast region as well. I'm working on a statewide access group. You've heard this, it's kind of a broken record, but we're getting that one underway again, that discussion. And so you'll be hearing more about that since we got through with COVID, or hopefully we'll getting through with it. Larry mentioned some closures, and I wanted to bring up a couple that Dan had mentioned. The Mount Evans Road closure. Forest Service has closed the Mount Evans Road, or they will not open it this year. And so that's going to impact some sheep and goat hunters up in that area. So we're working closely with those folks, notifying them by letter and making sure that they're aware of that. There are other areas to hunt in those units. So we hope that it won't impact hunting too terribly up there. And in the Boulder Ranger District, the Forest Service is going to enact a closure for camping, dispersed camping closure in the West Magnolia area. And we were successful in getting them to exclude hunters from that closure. I think it's still a lot to be worked out about how enforcement will be done on that, but we're going to continue to have those conversations. We have our novice hunter program in the Northeast region that brings new hunters and reactivated hunters into pheasant hunting specifically. And so we're moving forward with that, and the Corners for Conservation properties that provide really great access, great opportunities for us to take those novice hunters out and hunt pheasants. And the last thing I wanted to let you know about is that we've got 3 herd management plans for Eastern Plains deer management that will be discussed on a Zoom call on August 18th. And we're redoing 3 of those. Those plans are up for revision. And I think there will be some great discussion and great information in that Zoom call. So with that, I know I ran a little bit long, but with that, I'll take any questions if there are any.
Great, thanks, Mark. Clearly, there's a lot going on in all of our regions. I do not see any hands raised at the moment. I do see a chat question from Mark Scofield. So he's back on. So his question is for Brett. And he's asking, is the bear trash policy in Colorado Springs having an effect? He says he's seeing fewer bears this year in his neighborhood, and his constituents are impressed with tips and the media attention when tips helps catch poachers. Oh, and then he has another question about CWD strategy. So you want to start with bear trash policy in Colorado Springs?
Sure, I'll just be really brief about that. Thanks for the question, Mark. And we've been working very hard on that, not just in Colorado Springs, but statewide. Colorado Springs happens to be a hotspot for bear interactions with the public. And so we have worked hard to educate the public, and members of the public have worked hard to educate the public. And I really feel like in Colorado Springs, we really have moved towards an understanding of how to work with and live amongst bears. One of the great things that we've done, and Regional Manager Romatsky worked on this as well as Reed DeWalt, together with Frank McGee, who's the Area Wildlife Manager for Colorado Springs, is we implemented a new bear conflict app, which helps better track bear conflicts and helps us better respond to them. And so kudos to those folks for moving us along in technological advances. I do think the trash, just like anywhere else that we're able to pass these trash ordinances, it does make a difference. You remove attractants for bears and they don't want to hang out near you. And so trash obviously is the largest attractant for bears. And the more trash we take off the streets, the more bears we move along to other places. So we have seen, we continue to have bear conflicts in and around Colorado Springs, but we have seen fewer bears roaming the neighborhoods, breaking into trash cans as that ordinance has been passed.
Great. So then he just had a comment about tips and that he was impressed with how it's helping to catch poachers. And then he does have another question that's about the CWD strategy of increasing harvests of mature bucks. And he says, is there any new thinking on this CWD strategy?
Boy, I'll tell you, there's a lot of thinking on that strategy, and we've been talking a lot about it. And that's one that I would defer to Assistant Director Reed DeWalt. Certainly, I'm happy to handle that if he'd rather, but it might be more appropriate for him to give us his thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I guess I'm trying to determine what the question is, but I think most of you know we were the commission approved our CWD management plan last year. We're starting to implement that plan and aspects of that plan. Recently, there was a publication, or there's soon to be a publication in the Journal of Wildlife Diseases that talks about that management strategy. And I don't want to pass it along too much, but Jeff or Stig may be better to answer that question as it came out of our research section on that wildlife disease article.
I know Jeff's been having some connectivity issues that have been frustrating him with his loaner computer, and so he may be stuck in the loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can provide a brief summary or if Jeff jumps on. Jeff, are you on?
Yeah, I just got back in. I'm losing the signal every few minutes now. In the interest of time, I'd be happy to put something in writing and send it to the group so we can keep on, or however you prefer, Jody.
I think writing sounds great. if you just type it into the chat box, and then you don't have to worry as much about your service. Sounds good. All right, I don't see any more comments or hands raised. So I say we keep moving with our agenda. And next we have a regional update from JT for the Northwest region.
Thanks, Jody. Again, Mark, I appreciate your update. We'll continue to try and send water to your reservoirs. Another formal request, Jody, on the regional manager updates, if I could be moved up into the middle or something, just so I don't end every time and push everybody over the time and get a bad reputation, that'd be great. But all kidding aside, just a couple quick things. I've been sitting here trying to narrow my stuff down. We also have some herd management plans coming to the commission here shortly in September. One is D7, the White River mule deer herd. Once exceeded 100,000 animals, now around 30,000. That plan is an incredibly important plan for us, but certainly it's been vetted really well over here, but we'd love to have as much input as we can through the commission process as well. So that one's a big one for us. Also, if you haven't been paying attention, the West Slope Mountain Lion Plan will be held at its final hearing in September, which unfortunately was supposed to be in Meeker, but COVID virtual will get it done. Any of the Sportsman Roundtable folks that can weigh in on that or assist with that, I think it'd be super helpful from my perspective. It's a super solid, built on the foundation of biology, gives us some flexibility. And unfortunately, anytime you talk about predators, especially mountain lions, the anti-hunting folks come out in droves, and there's significant pressure to potentially not move in that direction. So for what it's worth, as I said last night, the big thing right now are some fires and drought conditions. The Southwest has creeped into the Northwest now, and we're on fire. So the Grizzly Creek fire just is about over 3,000 acres today. We actually have some staff that have been evacuated from their homes. We're looking at some impacts to bighorn sheep hunting and some other things. The Pine Gulch fire, which I think last night when I was talking to everybody, was about 32,000 acres, which I almost stuttered to say that last night. I'll tell you right now, it's over 50,000 today. So almost doubled in size since we spoke last night. Right now, it's the 7th largest fire in Colorado's history. And I'm really hoping it doesn't jump Roan Creek and head north. There's nothing stopping it to Meeker if it does. So the Piceance and everything else, we've got some major considerations there. With the drought comes fishing closures, water temperatures, aquatic issues. We have some voluntary closures in place right now, nothing mandatory at this point in time, but certainly monitoring a lot of our aquatic resources. We also are closing down several shooting ranges this week as counties begin to go from stage 1 to stage 2 fire restrictions. We're working closely with our fire districts and our sheriffs on that. And unfortunately, we're having to close quite a few ranges. Fortunately, though, one range continues to be operational, and that's Cameo, our outdoor shooting and education complex outside of Palisade. This last weekend, we held the Hornady multi-gun national championship out there, got national television, and we're getting ready to host our Rocky Mountain Regional IDPA match out there. So that's an exciting venue. We're looking at we'll have the national IDPA matches next year, and then the year following that, the world matches here in Cameo at a facility that was almost 90% funded with PR dollars. So that's good stuff. Chronic wasting disease, we're doing a significant amount of the Northwest region is mandatory testing this year, which will finish everything for us. And we continue to look forward to try and figure out new and innovative ways to manage some of those. So I had an awful lot of other things, but for time's sake, Jody, I'll turn it back over to you. And I'd just soon hear from some of the roundtable members on things that we hadn't belabored tonight.
Great, thanks, JT. Yeah, and As usual, we're pressing up against our agenda time, but it's great to see that even in this virtual format, you all are still engaged and talking and bringing issues up. So really appreciate the level of engagement tonight. So I don't see any hands up, JT. So I think we can go ahead and move to our next agenda item, which is the roundtable. And this is a time really for you all to bring up issues that you want to talk about while you've got this time with CPW. And so with that, I'm going to roll over to you all. We do have a 7 p.m. End time, so it gives you all a little over 10 minutes. And with that, I see a couple hands coming up, starting with Ron Goodrich. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, my question is probably JT or one of the other regional managers is we have the two tests, the bear test or the deer test in the Arkansas River and the Piceance Basin. Do we have any data on those? I know they're ongoing, but if there's an update on those?
Thanks for the question. I'll actually turn it over if Jeff's still on and available to answer that. He's more appropriate. Jeff, are you on?
I'm on, but I keep getting bumped off of Wi-Fi. I didn't hear the question, JT. And I was trying to read a text from Mark, so my apologies. Since my Wi-Fi went down, I thought I'd read a text. So please state the question again, and I'll give it a shot as long as my connection lasts.
Jeff, this is Ron, and I was asking for an update on the two, the Arkansas River and Piceance Basins depredation tests that are ongoing.
Yeah.
Do we have any update on them?
Well, not very detailed. The Piceance study concluded, and we are in the phase of analyzing the data, and we'll start writing a paper on that this fall. And then we have to submit that paper to a journal, and we generally don't provide the results, the tentative results, until we get approval from the editor to accept the paper. We just dealt with that on a larger monograph about the uncompahgre lions and deer and so forth. And then, of course, we're, I think, in year 3 or 4, I can't remember now, I think maybe 4 of the Arkansas study. And that's a 9-year study, so we're not even halfway through the field portion of that study.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So next I see Willie Kolaski's got, you've got your hand up. Go ahead, Willie.
Thanks, Jody. I'll be very quick. I didn't think of this when when JT was talking earlier about the other subject there, but with regard to this discussion on oil and land use on public lands, and then Brett talking about Fisher's Peak, I would like to formally request this body, this roundtable, be informed if there's any communication from oil and gas companies to do some research or explore Fisher's Peak area, because right now that's to me, unless I'm wrong, is a pristine area. But I remember moving here in '96 and seeing Bosque del Oso, how pristine it was. And now if you look on Google Earth, there's roads and square plots of land all over the place down there. So if we get inquiries on Fisher's Peak, I'd like to ask that this body be informed on it. That's all. Thank you.
Brett might be the best one to answer, to say something to that, Willie, but I'll jump in really quickly. Thank you for the comments there. So we work with the BLM and obviously with COGCC too. And within some of the rules, we try and highlight state wildlife areas and also state parks and their benefits. And what we've asked for is like non-surface occupancy and different types of stipulations or no leasing, also in a lot of those federal leasing parameters. So we've been successful in some places and we haven't in others. Garfield Creek State Wildlife Area was all fee mineral. So those privately held minerals were let out, and we've worked. This is what I will say is that part of the benefit of having those energy liaisons and other people, we've had some tremendous successes with relationship building with oil and gas companies to where they've worked really closely with us to develop surface use agreements and other things that minimize some of those impacts. So, but your point is not lost on us for sure. So thank you.
Yeah, it wasn't a point or a poke in the eye or anything. I was just thinking that if CPW starts getting inquiries from oil and gas companies, hey, we want to explore Fisher's Peak, that this Sportspersons Roundtable would be notified of that as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Appreciate that and noted.
All right, I'm looking for other hands up, or if folks on the phone want to say something. Looks like maybe Director Prenzo would like to say something.
Yeah, I'll probably try and finish. We might still have some other questions, but dawned on me that we also at the commission passed a new regulation for fur bearers here, I think last meeting, if I recall. And it was asked for by fur takers and trappers that we do a permit system so we could track fur take. So that will be implemented this next year. So we can get concrete surveys on what we take on predator hunters and trappers, etc. So we can have really good detail on the amount of take on species. We've always done that with bobcat. We won't do that with coyotes, but we will do that with all other fur bearers. And so that'll be an improvement. That was something that our constituents asked for, so we have better data for, other than just our general HIP system. So you might see that coming if you're one of those. And like I said, we think it'll be a better system, and we'll look forward to some of that data. We can defend what we do better with real data. So again, wait to see if there's any other questions, and I'll try and end with before we end.
Great, thanks, Director. Any other comments or topics or issues folks want to bring up? I know we don't have a ton of time left, but there's a couple minutes.
Hey, Jody, while we're waiting, if anybody else has anything, just really quickly, I was remiss to mention the fact that from a fisheries perspective, if you're paying attention to a lot of the fishing regulations, one of the hot topics of here lately has been spear fishing, and doing some of that just for the Sportsman's Roundtable. Just so you guys know, that proposal has been killed at this point in time. We're not going to move forward with it, but we do want to circle back around to some of the fishing community and some of the other folks from a statewide perspective and continue some conversations.
Thanks, JT. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So Director Prenzo, why don't you go ahead?
All right, well, thanks, Jody. I want to thank Jody and Dion for hosting us and putting up with our non-mutes, mutes, and computer drops off and all that. So I would be interested, whether directly to me or your regional manager or anybody on the leadership team, or let Jody know if you thought this was beneficial as best we could do, really via COVID. Again, we would like to meet in person. We will do that as soon as we can. We also went to the 2 hour for 2 nights instead of trying to shoot one of your weekends, especially when we're going to be in our houses on a weekend. So thought we could knock that off in the evening. People driving home from work or calling in from work, etc. And so I kind of liked it. I'm not sure I want to do this forever. I'd rather meet in person, but give us your thoughts collectively or after the fact. If this was helpful, again, welcome to the new participants. Lots of great questions. I know we had some answers. It looks like Jeff's going to answer some questions online, but let's just keep the communication coming. Look forward if any of especially the new members, I would encourage you to invite and make the regional manager pay for coffee, but take them out for coffee and make them pay for it. And introduce yourself, give them your background, and let's keep this lines of communication open. We'll have a winter meeting. We'll see how we can do that. And obviously we'll have regional meetings prior to that winter meeting. So Jody, do you have any kind of sense? Is that generally February? I don't recall.
Yeah, our winter meeting is typically held in February or March, and yeah, and we'll absolutely try to move forward and have that in person if COVID allows us to. We also do sometimes have conference calls in between meetings, you know, depending on if things come up or something's happening with a legislative session. We might try to pull you all together for a conference call. Otherwise, yeah, regional caucus meetings, look for announcements for those. And I do see that Ron Goodrich, you've got your hand up. Ron, do you have something quick you'd like to add?
Yes, and I know Parks and Wildlife people can't do anything about this, but the Sportsman Roundtable members probably want to get out at their constituents and deal with this wolf issue or non-wolf issue, make people aware of what can happen, that it's better for Parks and Wildlife, the experts, to manage the wildlife in the state rather than the ballot box. Let's not let this pass. Let's not let happen to the wolves what happened to the spring bear hunts. If you can, you need to talk to everybody you can and get them to vote no. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any more hands up. So with that, I'll just again reiterate huge thanks to you all. If you've got questions or comments or any follow-up thoughts, please reach out to me and contact me and let me know, or reach out to your regional managers. And I will be in touch with meeting notes and updates about future meetings. So again, thank you all for taking your evening and for joining us. And that's all we got.